Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a live debate between the two candidates for state senator for the Middlesex Worcester districts. They are, of course, Senator Jamie Eldridge, the incumbent, and Dean Kavanaugh. I've already ruined this thing. Terrible.
Cavaretta, Mr. Moderator.
I know, it's Cavaretta. Excuse me, Dean. The challenger, the worthy challenger. And the program tonight is brought to you by Acton TV and Patch.com, and I'm your moderator, Don Mackenzie. What do we hope to accomplish this evening? We hope to be able to better inform you, the audience, about the candidates' views on the issues so that you'll be able to make the most informed choice when you go to vote on the 6th of November. The answers will also, to the questions that the candidates will be asked, should give you some insight into their character, who they are, and how they think. What we want tonight is passion, not rancor. We want straight answers to straight questions. Now, I think it's appropriate if we ask each of the candidates to give us about a minute's worth on their resumes, on their background. And Dean, we will start with you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here tonight for this unprecedented debate. My name is Dean Cavaretta, and I'm a candidate for state senate. I'm running for this office on my own strengths, as my background as a certified teacher, former transportation official, former commissioner on the Acton Housing Authority, former member of the Acton 2020 Committee, and former member of the Stowe Finance Committee. I think this year, in particular, we need new ideas and new people to represent us at Beacon Hill, because the status quo is not working. Our state is faring better than other states, but we have a long way to go. My campaign platform and slogan is putting education and the economy first, because those issues for Metro West, for Acton, for Westboro, for Northboro, for Sudbury, and every point in between is important for our future and for our children. You know, on these issues, taxes, I don't believe now is the time to raise taxes in the middle of this recession. On Medicare, I believe it's time to save Medicare for seniors and not expand the program beyond senior citizens. On transportation, as a former transportation official, I'm committed to making sure that performance-based management and on-time delivery is improved for our projects. They're taking way too long.
Dean, thank you very much, Dean. And you've got a minute to give us something on your background, Jamie.
Great. Well, thank you, Mr. Moderator, and I want to thank the Acton Patch, Acton Cable TV for sponsoring and hosting tonight's debate. And it's a very important debate that I think will highlight the differences amongst the candidates between myself and Mr. Cavaretta on a whole variety of issues. I feel very honored and very lucky, in fact, to have grown up in Acton and gone through the Acton-Boxborough Public Schools, as has Dean. And the values that I learned, whether from my family, from teachers, from members of the community, have sustained me in the legislation that I've fought for in the legislature. Investing in education, investing in transportation infrastructure, supporting the innovation economy, whether life sciences or alternative energy, and also fighting for a more independent body in the legislature, fighting for transparency, whether talking about corporate tax breaks for spending, disclosure in legislative votes, or making sure there's strongest possible ethics reform in the Massachusetts legislature. These are the values I was raised with. These are the values I fight for in the legislature. I look forward to talking about these and many, many other issues tonight.
Well, thank you very much, Jamie. Those are two good answers and a good way to start off. Now we're going to move into the more difficult questions. But before we move into some really hard questions, I want to review a couple of rules of debate, and then we'll start off with some easy ones that tell us something about character as opposed to your view on issues. First, we're going to ask a series of questions of both of you, and those questions will have come from the audience or a series of audiences that we have. But we're going to give you 2 minutes to answer each question, and we will alternate which of you goes first. So because you went first last time, we'll have Jamie go first this time. We are going to ask you to cover only your own positions, not the other guy's position. Don't define what Dean thinks, Jamie, and Jamie will not do the other opposite. So we think that there should be few rebuttals and only for factual matters. If you would hold to that, we would appreciate it. If you wish to make a rebuttal and you find it necessary, just ask me tell me that you want to make a rebuttal when your turn comes up. Answer the questions asked. This is a very important one. Don't answer the question that I wish he'd asked this question, but I'm going to answer it anyway. So answer the question that is asked. That would be very helpful. We want to keep this debate on the highest civil plane possible, and good luck to both of you. So we will start out now, and Jamie, you will answer this question first. And the first question is, what political figure from U.S. history do you admire the most, and why? And you have a minute to answer that question.
1 minute, sure. Well, there's a lot of political figures that I admire. I would say probably the person I most admire, and I think it's particularly appropriate given what the country is going through right now, is Franklin D. Roosevelt. Greatly admired his ability to come in a time of crisis because of the Great Depression that was going on, because people were suffering across the country, and he was able to propose very bold policies to help solve some of the ills of the nation, help reduce some of the suffering, and get people back to work. And I think that's largely what has happened over the past 4 years. My work in the legislature has been fighting for more local aid for education, investing in transportation infrastructure, including the recent expansion of the Fitchburg commuter rail and the new South Acton train station that will be up and running in about 2 years, and also advocating for bold legislation like the Green Communities Act. I was the lead sponsor in updating that legislation, and supporting legislation in the area of life sciences, as there's a number of life sciences and pharmaceutical companies that have come to this region and employ many, many people. I do believe that my role in the legislature is to be bold, to stand on principle, and to fight for what I believe in. It's something I believe very strongly in. I think I've had some good successes, but of course there's always much more work to do.
Thank you, Jamie. And Dean, to the same question, what political figure from U.S. history do you admire the most, and why?
Well, Mr. Moderator, thank you for the question. As a certified history teacher, I think I hopefully should be able to get this one. I certainly tell my students that history is the best subject, but of course I'm biased. Of course, this background doesn't hurt any of us either. The figures I admire is Teddy Roosevelt because he was a reformer, JFK because he was a free market Democrat, and by the way, if you support President Kennedy, you're closer to me than my opponent. Paul Tsongas for his personal integrity and stands against debts and deficits, and Governor Paul Cellucci, who's endorsed me in this campaign from Hudson, for his courageous battle right now against ALS. You know, Jamie mentioned the role in the legislature. It's to be independent, and I can assure you that I will not vote with my leadership 90% of the time, as reported in the Lowell Sun a couple weeks ago. I think this is a purple district. It's a moderate district. It's a district that needs a uniter, not a divider. It needs someone that's centrist on the issues, and that's what I bring to this campaign.
Thank you, Dean. We'll try the second question now. It's a little bit closely allied to the first question, but a little bit different. If you were flying to Los Angeles or London, about a 5 or 6 hour flight, who would you like to have seated next to you for that flight?
That's a very good question, Mr. Moderator.
I would say it would be my wife, by the way, but you can answer any way you want.
Boy, that's a very good question. Well, sticking with the U.S. history theme, I would probably say Dwight D. Eisenhower, because I would ask him about D-Day and the logistical challenges of that Normandy invasion. You know, I've talked a lot about history in this campaign. I believe that we should have a U.S. history MCAS so that it stays a core subject. I believe we can have a balanced approach where we can have that exam, but also give school committees and districts flexibility. It's a tough issue because the school day is only so long. But I can assure you on education issues, I'm going to take the lead. I'm going to put education as important as my opponent has put alternative energy, because that's the future. That's tied to our economy. It would be Ike as my co-pilot, and we talk a lot about what it takes to lead, and that's what we need over the next term as state senate.
It's a good answer, but I hope you'll be able to stick to the question. I know it's a real temptation to go back to something more broad, but if we could just kind of stick to the question, that would be helpful. Jamie, who do you want to have sit beside you when you're traveling off to London or LA sometime on a long plane ride? A non-political figure would be
Sure.
fine, not just a political figure.
Well, I would say if I was taking a flight to the West Coast, One of the things that I have focused on as a legislator, and this really comes from my roots, is being an activist at the local level when I returned to Acton from college, is a lot of environmental legislation, a lot of environmental activism. Just 2 weeks ago, I was out in the town of Ayer doing an event with Clean Water Action and environmental activist Marion Stoddard. Marion is from the town of Groton, and when she and her husband moved to Groton, which is along the Nashua River, about, around the 1950s, the Nashua River was one of the most polluted rivers in the entire country. You could actually tell what kind of paper was being printed in the mills that day by looking at the color of the ink in the river, the color of the river. And what she did, really beginning since the early 1960s, it did something that really no one else thought could be done. She cleaned up the Nashua River, which not only allowed people to get back into the river and enjoy it recreationally, to go fishing, but also I think was a big economic revitalization for the region. And if you go up to Groton, if you go to anywhere along the Nashua River, Ayer, Shirley, Littleton area, it's a wonderful area to live in, great public schools, and I have to say I'm not sure if all that would have happened without the activism of Marion Stoddard. There are those kind of activists that are working each and every day in our communities, and that's probably who I'd take the plane ride with.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's see if we can get a sports question in here. Jamie, you're going to answer this one first. What New England sports team has captured your heart and why?
It's an easy answer, the Boston Celtics, for a number of reasons. Certainly not that I'm very good at basketball, but I've certainly tried. When I went to Acton-Boxborough Regional High School, I played on the basketball team, and we had a great team. We went all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals. This is before the Boston Garden had been torn down, so we played in the very last year that the Boston Garden was up. And even though we lost in the Eastern Conference Finals, just to be able to play on the parquet was an amazing experience that I'll never forget. And you know, it was an experience actually, and maybe this speaks to my lack of basketball skills, that my nickname was the Senator, even back then. In other words, I was not very good at basketball, but I guess I was already working my political skills. So I'd say the Boston Celtics. I was really hoping they'd go to the finals this year. I think that the Big Three were an amazing combination. It's sad to see that they've broken up, and hopefully after next year it'll be a rebuilding year.
Well, I have a confession to make. I played in the first year they opened the Boston Gardens on the same floor for Needham High School.
Okay.
Not the first year. Dean, why don't you take a shot at the same question?
Well, that's a very good question, and Jamie's answer was very good. But for me, it would have to be the Patriots 2001. Basically, that miracle season when they first won their first Super Bowl. We all remember 9/11 and the tough year that was, and the scroll of names at the halftime presentation with U2 coming out. You know, Jamie mentioned his career at AB. I've been lucky enough to coach at Acton-Boxborough, both a football and lacrosse team. I've taught at the summer school. I've taught as a substitute teacher. I've been a school-to-community partner over the years. I've certainly tried to stay very close to the high school and the staff and all the people involved in our schools. Education is the lifeblood of our district. It is the engine of our economy in some respects, brain power and human capital. But the Pats 2001, Adam Vinatieri in the game before the Super Bowl would have to stick out for me. To all my lacrosse friends out there, don't worry, I'll try to work in a lacrosse question too, but that would be my answer.
Okay, we're going to have one more little sports question and then on to the ones of substance. But because you fellows are so authoritative, I want to know where to place my bet next year. What about the Red Sox? Better? You can answer in one word. Better, worse, the same? What do you think? Dean, you're going to take this one first.
One word?
Well, you can answer in more than one word, but if you could answer it in one word, that would be fine too.
I would say interesting and not boring.
Interesting and not boring, good.
I happen to think it'll be better. I think that's probably an easier standard to suggest. One of the questions when I started this term was, you know, how many wins do you predict the Red Sox will win this season? And I think I predicted 94 wins, so I was widely off. I think that next year will be a better year, but I think it'll be a rebuilding year, and I think it's going to take a manager to be there more than 1 year for the Red Sox to really be good.
And I can count on that. Good.
just like you could my prediction this year.
All right, thank you very much. Well, Jamie, you're going to start off answering the next question, and it's a more serious question. You'll have 2 minutes to answer it. And the question is, why should the voters care about this election for state senate? Why should they care about this election? There's a lot of other elections. Why this one?
You know, one of the things that I enjoy the most is in my job is getting to work with local officials and federal officials. And I do have to say that, you know, although federal policies, whether you're talking about national health care, whether you're talking about policies like Don't Ask, Don't Tell with the U.S. military, whether you're talking about decisions of war or peace or at the federal level, I find that in my experience talking to voters, the experiences and sort of the quality of life that they are most connected to are state policies. You talk about education aid. Most of education aid that schools get across the district and across the state is from state funding, aside from property taxes. Federal funding is there a little bit for special education, but it's rather marginal. Environmental policies. In terms of my work with looking to clean up the Aspet River, the Nashua River, most of that work is done with the DEP as opposed to the EPA. You talk about state policies like anti-bullying. That was a state legislation that I filed last session, was very proud to pass in the legislature in my first term as a senator. So I think that the state policies are something that have a direct connection to people. And as I said earlier, there are clear differences between my opponent and myself on these issues. I've been very proud of the work I've done to reform the Chapter 70 formula, to be the lead sponsor on updating the Green Communities Act, anti-bullying legislation, securing infrastructure investments, including the Fitchburg commuter rail, the Worcester commuter rail. So I've had some successes, and it's something that I want to go back to the legislature and do more. And these are all policies that are affecting people now, but I'd be the first to acknowledge that we can do better, and I want to go back to hopefully fill my third term as senator and get back to some of the more progress in those areas.
Thank you very much. Dean, do you want to take a shot at the same question?
Thanks, Mr. Moderator. Voters should care about this election for state senate because by far it's the most important election of our lifetime. And there is a clear choice amongst the candidates. This election comes down to who is truly independent, who's going to follow the Scott Brown model, which has worked well in the U.S. Senate. And I will follow that model. It means working with all sides. I'm the only candidate in this race that can work with Senator Kerry and Scott Brown, Senate President Therese Murray, and Senate Minority Leader Bruce Tarr. In terms of local aid is down. It's down 18% over the last 3 to 4 years. Education aid is still not fair and equitable, and the majority party has promised that for over 15 years. On transportation, how is it that we can build a 40-foot story skyscraper faster than a 40-foot section of bridge? The average road and bridge time takes 7 to 10 years to build right now. Way too unacceptable. It's not economic stimulus. I've worked on reforms with both parties on that issue, and I'll do it as your next state senator. On Medicare, it's time that we save Medicare for seniors and don't enlarge the program here in Massachusetts to everybody. We cannot afford that type of expenditure or new open-ended entitlement. On jobs and the economy, our region of the state does a lot better than some other regions, but we have a long way to go. I am in this race because people are working twice as hard and making half as much. The other thing, it's about our young people, the people we've invited here, the kids, the next generation. How is it that 50% of them can't find jobs after graduation? They can't start their careers, and boomers can't end theirs. And those of us in the middle and Gen X are struggling to find full-time work. That is why I am running, because we can do far better. It's time for a change. It's time for balance on Beacon Hill. And I ask people to go to my website, deancavaretta.com, to learn more about my platform. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean. Now, the next question, you will start this off. And the question is, what committees would you like to serve on in the Senate, and how would your serving on them help the citizens in your district?
Well, Don, we're making news here tonight because this is a very important question. I've already secured commitments from Senate Minority Leader Bruce Tarr to go and serve on the Education Committee. I want to repeat that. I will serve on the Joint Education Committee if elected, as promised by the Republican caucus at the State Senate. What does that mean? It means that excellence in education is going to be preserved for our district. It means that we're going to reform Chapter 70. We're going to make school building assistance more flexible for local officials. We're going to remove unfunded mandates. We had a debate in Marlborough last night. We had a disagreement on whether there are state unfunded mandates. I can assure you there are state unfunded mandates in education, on the municipal side, and on the healthcare side. So I'm going to go on the Education Committee, Don, and I'm going to fight for our district. I'm going to fight as hard as I would an environmental issue, because education is 2/3 of the locality's budget, and it's important from Westboro to Acton to Fort Devens to Marlborough. And so I look forward to that. If I have an option on another one, I think my experience in transportation is a logical second choice. Of course, we all want Ways and Means to work on the budget because our spending is out of control. We don't have a revenue problem at the state level. We have a spending, debt, and fraud problem. And we need new faces to go up there to have more debate. How is it that the operating budget totaling $36 billion is gavelled through in a matter of weeks? We can do a lot better, and we need new faces, and we need more debate, and that's what I'll push for. Just like this guy behind me, Thomas Jefferson, we need robust debate at the State House and restored democracy.
Thank you, Dean. Jamie, your question is very similar, but it's what committees will you serve on? Because you probably know by now, and on most of them. So what committees will you serve on, and why does that help your district?
Yeah, well, I've had the pleasure of serving on a number of committees as a legislator now for 10 years. I did just want to point out the budget process that goes on by Ways and Means. That's about a 6-month process that begins from about early January through June. So it's not a 2-week process as my opponent suggested. But the committee process is something that's very important for a whole group of subject matter. And I would be honored to chair the Environmental Committee. Democratic senators get to chair committees. And what I would like to work on is in the area of alternative energy, but also a new area that I think really has a lot of potential to create jobs in the area of green chemistry and clean technology. A lot of people ask what that is. There's a number of high-end manufacturing companies in Massachusetts that are producing products that can be made without the toxic chemicals. And I think it's a source of a lot of jobs, whether you're talking about engineers, whether you're talking about technicians. It can be everyone, from everyone who has an associate's degree to someone who has a PhD. And it's an area, I think, of real job growth, particularly in the Metro West, which has an excellent educated workforce. So the Environment Committee is something that I would be honored to chair. In terms of other committees that I think will be doing a lot of work next year, clearly the Transportation Committee. And the point about transportation is we've made some critical investments in this area. I mentioned the Fitchburg Commuter Rail, mentioned the Worcester Commuter Rail, but I think now it gets down to more of the local investment. Regional transit authorities increasing investment to expand programs like the Minute Van here, which serves the town of Acton very well. Expanding investment in rail trails. We have a wonderful rail trail with the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail, but it hasn't yet come through Acton into Concord. That's something that we can work on. The Aspet River Rail Trail connecting it through Maynard, Acton into Stowe and Hudson. So I think that the area of transportation is now about investment, not just in commuter rail, but also about rail trails, about roads and bridges, regional transit authority, and those are areas that clearly we're going to take up next session.
Thank you.
Mr. Moderator, I just had a quick point of
Sure,
clarification.
go ahead.
I just wanted to ask Jamie, are you the chair of Environment now?
No, I'm chair of the Housing Committee.
Okay.
Okay?
I'm the vice chair of the Environment Committee.
Okay. We'll move on to another question now. I think this is an interesting question. As you've campaigned going door to door, hosting coffees, holding signs, meeting voters, what have been the 2 most often heard local issues voters are concerned about, and how would you as a state senator help resolve these? So what do you hear the most from people, and what are the 2 most, not important, but the 2 that you hear the most?
Well, for me, and I've gone door to door in each of the 14 communities in the Middlesex and Worcester district. I'm always very proud to run a strong grassroots campaign. I would say that the issue I've heard the most, and it has 2 sort of aspects to it, is first of all that it's important to remember that the reason that many people move to the Metro West region and to the Middlesex and Worcester district is the quality of the public schools. We have the best public schools, first of all, in the nation. Massachusetts does. And many of the public schools in this region are the best in the state, and that's something to be very proud of. But that doesn't just happen on its own. People are concerned about how that's going to continue, how are we going to move forward and make sure that education remains excellent. Right now, the Acton and Boxborough separate school committees and the Acton-Boxborough School Committee are discussing full regionalization. So how is that going to happen? Is the state going to step up and provide additional state funding? The other side of that is property taxes, as people are getting fed up with rising property taxes. And the biggest thing that I believe and propose is to dramatically increase education funding so that every child, no matter what community they grow up in, gets an excellent education. So I would say that's the area that I hear the most about. And I think the other area is jobs. And I think there's different perspectives that will be highlighted tonight about job strategy. I think it's about investing in transportation infrastructure, water infrastructure to attract more companies to this region. It's about higher education, investing in community colleges and the UMass system to better train high school graduates and even adults who may have lost a job and now need to go back and get retrained. So I think the area of job creation is very complex, but it can be about higher education, it's about the innovation economy, whether it's life sciences, whether it's alternative energy, whether it's green chemistry or clean technology that I mentioned. Massachusetts has always been a state that has been the cusp of innovation. It's the reason that the unemployment rate in Massachusetts is lower than most other states. And I would take a particular point of pride that the Metro West region has a 4% unemployment rate, so it's lower than many other parts of the state. That doesn't just happen on its own, it's the contributions of the community, but it's also state policy that drives job creation throughout the region.
Thank you, Jamie. Dean, would you
John,
like to take a swing at that one?
Thank you. It's very hard to pick two. There are a lot of pressing needs out there. I think I'll pick unfunded mandates and jobs. Unfunded mandates are taking away any aid that our cities and towns get. You know, for every dollar we get in state aid, we're only getting 64 cents back in a lot of cases. Local aid is down, as I mentioned. Unfunded mandates are really driving property taxes higher. It's a tough situation when the economy is retrenching. In terms of jobs, Jamie mentioned the unemployment rate, but we know that the situation is a lot more tougher than that. Kids coming out of school can't find full-time work with benefits. People are wondering if they're going to hang on to their jobs, and companies of substantial size are leaving our region. Fidelity, Monster.com. What is going to be the new EMC? Where are we going to find the new digital? We need to have people and companies come here. The job strategy that has been attempted already has not worked, giving special tax breaks to certain companies. Evergreen Solar left the district, and that cost $58 million. At the same time, the legislature voted to cut local aid. That's not fair, and it's not acceptable. That is not working. We need a new approach. We can't pick winners and losers in the tax code. We can't help special companies. We need to help the overall small business climate. I've been endorsed in this campaign by the National Federation of Independent Business. As I said earlier, I can work with both sides of the legislature to get a jobs agenda that works for our part of the state. I would ask people to go to my YouTube channel, Dean to Beacon Hill 2012, where they can view my jobs plan and other platforms that I've introduced in this campaign. Unfunded mandates affect schools, municipalities, and healthcare. And it's time we have a moratorium on all three. And as your next state senator, I'll offer legislation to do just that. We cannot burden the cities and towns any longer with what's going on at the local level. You know, on a brief stint in the Stowe Finance Committee, I learned that Stowe per capita has one of the smallest appropriations of local aid of any other town in the state. That's unacceptable. The majority party is not getting it done, and we can do better.
Thank you, Dean. The next question will go to you first. It's allied to that last one. What piece of legislation do you think is most important to pass, and how will you get it passed, since no legislator can do it alone?
Well, John, that's tough because I've offered an education plan in this campaign and I've offered a jobs plan. But if I had to pick one, I would pick the jobs plan, because if we grow the economy, we offer more revenue and resources at the local level to help the schools. My jobs plan is called Making Mass Competitive for New Jobs. I filed it through Jamie's office, and my plan is comprehensive and it's bipartisan. It has ideas from both parties. It freezes unnecessary regulations hurting small business. It applies a moratorium on unfunded mandates. It lowers taxes and closes corporate loopholes and special tax giveaways. It simplifies the tax code, and it's paid for with pay-go language that only has a reduction in rates with corresponding reductions in deductions and giveaways. It's important because we have to be more competitive. This state is competing with all over the world, with China, with London, with New Hampshire. Our sales tax is also uncompetitive. We need to roll that back closer to 5%. Air, Shirley, the towns in our northern part of the district are dying on the vine economically. We need to help them, and we need to be more competitive to help our schools and to help localities with resources they desperately need.
Thank you. And the same question, Jamie.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'd really have to respectfully disagree on your comments about Ayer and Shirley. I mean, Ayer and Shirley are not dying on the vine. They're thriving. We just regionalized the school system. People are feeling very positive about that, so I'm very proud to represent those towns.
I was talking
think things are going very well.
Jamie.
Excuse me, but in terms of the legislation that I would be filing, I think that what I have learned in my 10 years as a legislator, and it really comes from my first experience running when I ran as a clean elections candidate, publicly financed, is that all the legislation that is talked about tonight in the public interest, whether you're talking about better protecting the quality of our water, whether you're talking about expanding access to health care, whether you're talking about embracing recycling, so many of these bills are stopped by corporate special interests of the State House. Putting aside the Citizens United Supreme Court decision, which allows corporations to spend unlimited amounts of money in any election across this country, including here in Massachusetts. And I was very proud to lead the fight to pass a resolution opposing that decision. But putting that aside, there's not a level playing field at the State House. Corporate lobbyists outnumber public interest lobbyists 10, 20 to 1. And you see that in the legislation that didn't pass this year. Worked very hard on passing the bottle bill. That did not pass, largely because of the objections of beverage companies, including Ocean Spray and Polar Beverage Company. They have a whole army of lobbyists behind them to stop legislation. So I think that the best way around that is public campaign finance, how I was first elected, which is you get your funding publicly. You're not asking for donations from members of the public. You don't receive any PAC money. No special interests are allowed to give you money. And I think it would level the playing field and create a broader, more meaningful discussion by the public, by legislators, to pass legislation to really help improve people's lives. I think that's critical, and I am planning to file public campaign finance legislation at the beginning of next session if reelected.
Thank you, Jamie. And the next question is going to go to you first. And it is, describe your vision for public transportation in the district. What specific improvements would you push for to improve the bottlenecks on the roads in the district?
I'm guessing we're talking about Route 2.
I bet we are. Maybe between here and the Concord Rotary.
That's right. That's right. Well, the Concord Rotary, unfortunately, is on a bit of a delay, and that largely is the fact that we have a problem with enough revenue being dedicated to the transportation system. But in terms of my vision of public transportation in Massachusetts, and I don't want to sound like a broken record, but first of all, we have had some progress, great progress with upgrades to the Fitchburg commuter rail. The state now owns the CSX rail lines and the Worcester commuter rail in the southern part of this district. So that's very, very encouraging. But I think that now we need to talk about is the more town-to-town public transportation. So regional transit authority. Just recently, the state provided a Community Innovations Challenge grant to Littleton, Maynard, Acton, and Boxborough in order to look at how do we share the van shuttle service that exists amongst the councils on aging to make it more efficient and to provide a better service for those who are disabled and for senior citizens in sort of this part of the district. So I think that's an area we need to improve. Rail trails, I can't think of a more enthusiastic group of people than the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail Advocacy Group, the Aspet River Rail Trail Group, both rail trails of which will eventually run through Acton. But there's a funding problem. So I think we need to address that funding problem and connect the Aspet River Rail Trail to the South Acton train station so people can actually bike to the train and then go in and take the train to Boston or Cambridge. Regional Transit Authority is something that's very, very important. So we're going to get down to these level of details now that we've largely improved the commuter rail system. And I think that's the next step for what the legislature will work on next year in terms of public transportation.
Thank you, Jamie. And Dean, take a shot at the same one.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Respectfully, my opponent is writing checks the legislature can't cash. We have a lot of priorities and we have to balance the budget. And we have a $20 billion backlog on transportation jobs going back to the early 1990s. We have to make tough choices, but we have to take a step back when it comes to transportation. The average road and bridge job is taking way too long. Procurement, permitting, the project delivery process is too long and too outdated. The lowest bid is not the lowest bid anymore. I know, I've worked at Mass DOT 3 different times for 2 governors, 1 Republican, 1 Democrat. The project delivery process has to be reformed, similar to the Accelerated Bridge Program. We have to talk to the utility companies and give them the construction schedule. We have to demand accountability from the contractors, from the subcontractors, and we have to reform project delivery. We have to reform the transportation building in Boston. Since the merger, a lot of work, good work has been done, but we have a long way to go. I've worked in that building. I know what needs to be done. We have multiple IT departments still, from the MBTA, from the MTA, the Old Turnpike Authority, and the old Mass Highway. In the district offices in Arlington, I've worked there, District 4. In District 3 in Worcester, I've worked there, which cover the Highway Division. I can be responsive to this district on transportation on day one. There will be no learning curve as your next state senator on transportation. In terms of what can be done with bottlenecks, well, one is to make sure that jobs are faster. I have set the goal having all projects be 6 years or less, a 40% reduction, which is a Governor Patrick idea that I want to bring to the statewide road and bridge program. In terms of other reforms that need to be done, we have to look at personnel. We have to make sure that we have the best qualified engineers. It takes forever to hire a new engineer at Mass Highway. We have to do a much better job of attracting the best and brightest to stay in Massachusetts, to be project managers, because that is a key role on any project. And I can assure you, as state senator, I will not let a project go longer than on time and on budget. I will be zealous in making sure that we stay on time.
Thank you, Dean. And Dean, we're going to move on now to a new area of healthcare. And the first question, and you will be the first one to answer the question, is, in your opinion, has the mass healthcare law been effective, and why?
Great question, Don. The answer is yes and no. We have almost universal coverage, and that is a very laudable goal. And I salute Jamie and Governor Romney and every point in between for that. So when everyone talks about universal health care, we have it already. That's not what is being proposed. What we have now is how do we improve the Mass Health Connector, particularly, hopefully, if Obamacare is negated. You know, my opponent supports Obamacare, I do not. I support saving Medicare for seniors, age 65 and older. I do not support turning Massachusetts over to Medicare for all, as my opponent does. I think that's a fair and honest difference, which is relative to health care. I favor that difference, and I also favor improving the Mass Health Connector. The legislature mandated all the benefit plans and all the things that should be covered. We need more flexibility in those plans and give consumers more choice, that they can pick A, B, and C. A 19-year-old's needs for health care are a lot different than a 55-year-old. My needs as a 41-year-old is a lot different than someone who's about to retire. So we have to recognize that in the connector, and that's not there now. So I favor incremental health care reform that can pass, not pie-in-the-sky ideas that turn us into Vermont or Canada. That's the difference on health care. And we'll see what happens with the presidential election in Congress. But make no mistake about it, health care decisions are coming back to the states to decide. So in your vote, you have to choose who has the better priorities. Saving Medicare for seniors is one of mine. It's one of Scott Brown's priorities as well. I look forward to hearing what my opponent thinks on this issue.
Thank you, Dean. Jamie, the same question. Do you need it again, or?
No, I'm fine.
Okay.
I was very proud to support the Massachusetts healthcare law. I'm someone that does believe we need to be bolder in our approach in reforming healthcare, largely because of the administrative waste found in so many health insurance companies and often the ability for health insurance companies still to deny care. I think this is an issue where it shows the difference between my opponent and I in issues. One of the things he mentioned is that there are too many mandated benefits in the Massachusetts healthcare system. It's important to remember what that means. Mandated benefits means prescription drug coverage, which now is mandated. In other words, anyone who needs prescription drugs is covered by their insurance company. Programs to make sure you get coverage for surgery and cancer, that's a mandated requirement under the Massachusetts healthcare law. Visits to see a mental health professional, those are all mandated benefits. And the suggestion that if you take them away, that health insurance companies are just going to, out of the good of their heart, provide those benefits to people who need them, I think is rather illusory. The issue about health care is ultimately, and this is where Dean, you and I have a great disagreement, is I think health care should be a right. So the Massachusetts health care law gets us part of the way. We still need to address health care costs, and that's why I was very proud to support health care cost control legislation this session, both to reduce costs for individuals, for employers, and for hospitals, and hopefully for insurance companies too, that are still spending way too much of their money on excessive salaries by CEOs, marketing, advertising, and I think if we could dedicate that money to health care with a better system, I think it's going to be better access and better quality of health care for everyone in the Commonwealth.
Dean,
Just
you
a
have
short,
a
just a short
question?
rebuttal, Don, to the point on whether Jamie spoke for me about whether it's a right or not.
Go ahead. Let's
yeah,
hear what
thank
you
you.
have to say.
Yeah, I also believe health care is a right, but I think it's a right in the hands of the consumer, and I don't think government should be running it. So I wanted to clarify my position instead of my opponent speaking for me.
Okay.
Thanks.
Another question on health care. And Jamie, you will go first on this, I believe. Do you believe a health care provider should be able to deny health services for moral or ethical reasons?
No, I do not. And I think probably the question is referring the Blunt Amendment, which was a federal amendment filed at the federal level when the Affordable Care Act was being debated. I am a strong opponent of the Blunt Amendment, the idea that any employer for quote-unquote moral reasons could deny health care, because of course we each have our own morality, and the idea that an employer or a health insurance company could deny health care based on their own moral reasons, I think creates an incredible opening to deny health care, whether you're talking about women's health care, whether you're talking about access to contraception, whether you're talking about blood transfusions. There are a number of hospitals throughout this country that, whether due to their religious affiliation or the reasons of the CEO of that hospital, might decide to deny health care to their employees. I think that's wrong. I do think this is an area where my opponent and I disagree. I know from a blog earlier this year that you came out strongly in support of the Blunt Amendment, and I just think it puts a massive hole in the Massachusetts healthcare law, which, by the way, already has those protections before the federal law passed. And it's going to weaken access to health care, and I think it's going to reduce the quality of health care for every resident of Massachusetts.
Dean, the same question.
I fundamentally disagree with my opponent's assertion that the sky will fall if the Blunt Amendment stays in effect, because I think we have to be very, very clear on what it actually means. And my understanding of this federal law, which has nothing to do with our state Senate race directly, has to do with an individual provider's, an employee's moral obligation or moral belief on whether or not to go ahead with the procedure or not. And if that person wants to opt out, say a nurse or a doctor or a PA, they have the ability to opt out of a procedure because of their moral and religious beliefs. If that's the case, then I support it because that's their First Amendment rights. That's what this issue is about. The other side wants to turn it into this big debate about abortion. Well, I'm a pro-choice moderate Republican like Scott Brown. And I, like him, support the Blunt Amendment. I think it's been overly politicized, and I think we have to get back to the issues that really what this election is about, is preserving our excellence in education and moving forward with our economy, because that's what this election is about.
Good, thank you very much. We'll move on to another question, and if I look at the clock right, it says we have about 11 minutes and 30 seconds left in this debate, so we'll move along quickly. But this is a tough question. It deals with OPEB, other post-employment benefits. It's an enormous financial cloud hanging over Massachusetts. Acton's liability has been figured as high as $87 million. The question is, what solutions will you recommend and support to meet this fiscal liability? And this question goes first to you, Jamie, I believe.
Yes, I've had many discussions with the Acton-Boxborough School Committee about OPEB specifically, and I know he's no longer on the school committee, but John Peterson. I've had very in-depth discussions with him about this, and I know that there's been a committee in Acton looking at this issue, and this is an issue, not just specific to Acton. What are the pension liabilities for the state? What are the pension liabilities for school districts, for towns, in terms of fulfilling the promise that was made to public employees? So first of all, it's important for me to repeat that as fulfilling the promise to public employees. You're talking about public employees who've dedicated decades of their lives to being in the public service, whether they're in neighborhoods protecting families as police officers, going to a fire by the fire department, or our teachers. Now, I do think that we need to honor those commitments and provide the pension obligations that employees paid into when they first became public employees. And it's important to point out that the vast majority of public employees' pensions are paid every week through a payroll tax by public employees. But there is an obligation at the town and state level. I am a supporter of closing corporate tax loopholes and repealing back some of the corporate tax breaks that Massachusetts has passed over the past 20 years. I've been a critic of tax breaks like the film tax credit. It's about $125 million spent a year that I don't think is creating many jobs, creating much economic activity. That's money that could be dedicated to the pension obligations, whether you're talking about the local level or whether you're talking about the state level. Other corporate tax breaks, like the mutual fund industry tax break, I think is something we need to look at. And I think also in the area of fair taxation, I do think we have to have discussion about progressive taxation, and it's something that may come up next session.
Thank you, Jamie. And Dean, the same question about OPEB. Very difficult area.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm not in favor of raising taxes in the middle of a recession, and my position is consistent with President Clinton's position on new taxes during this Great Recession. In terms of corporate tax loopholes, well, Solyndra is one, Evergreen Solar, Beacon Power, A123 in Waltham that went bankrupt this week. That's a lot of federal and state money that can go to our obligations. In terms of pension reform, my opponent has voted consistently against pension reform, raising gradually the retirement age for new state employee hires, which I feel doesn't violate the collective bargaining. And as a former dues-paying member of the MTA, I think it's a balance. If a new teacher's coming in and their life expectancy and their retirement age is going to be longer, then I think gradually raising the age is reasonable. That passed the state Senate. My opponent voted against it. Recalculating payouts is another issue that I know local officials have been talking about. Defined benefit versus defined contribution. I think eventually we have to be more consistent with the private sector and move to a more 401k system. If we do not get a hold of our unfunded liabilities, it will crowd out all of the monies for education, for transportation, for the other areas we talked about. There is a 800-pound gorilla in the room, and it's called unfunded liabilities. California is in worse shape than Massachusetts, but our per capita is one of the highest in the nation, particularly because of transportation and other things. So when we talk about making the tough votes, the tough decisions, I want to work with both sides. That means Senator Tarr on the Republican side in the caucus there, and Senator Therese Murray on the other side, and reaching out to the House of Representatives and working with local legislators. A lot of legislators in Metro West are Republican, and we have to work together with them and the Democrats on solving this issue. It's not going away. We saw the debate with Chapter 69 with the Acton teachers and how it got to the local level. We need state leadership, and I'm going to provide it.
I'm just going to skip to a very quick question, 30 seconds. We didn't exactly plan it this way, but we're running down toward the end. I want to give you fellas a chance to close appropriately. With all of the problems we've talked about tonight, and all of the difficulties that there is in public life, why did you ever choose a crazy career like this to spend your time? Just 30 seconds or less, each one of you. Why did you do it? It's a hard job, and it isn't always rewarding, or is it?
I would say it's rewarding each and every day. I mean, there isn't a day that goes by, and I've been a legislator now for 10 years, where I don't get thanked for helping someone, get onto Mass Health or help fix a problem in their neighborhood or get them, cut through red tape to get help from a state agency. So I get thanked each and every day, and it's an honor to represent the district. So I love the job.
Thanks, Jamie.
Don, we've known each other a long time doing this. Public service is a noble calling. And, people know me. I've spoken out on these issues for a long time. And what's changed? 15 years ago, I called for the Concord Rotary to be abolished and reformed. 15 years ago, I called for more competition at the State House, noting that we don't have a robust debate on these issues. 15 years ago, I talked about the inequities in Chapter 70 funding. We're still here talking about the same issues because we have a legislature unresponsive to the needs of their citizens. We can change that. We can send new faces to Beacon Hill. Now more than ever, we don't have to settle. We don't have to settle for unemployment and people dropping out of the workforce. We don't have to settle for transportation jobs languishing for 7 years, for bridges closed for 8 years. We don't have to settle for our quality of education dropping. We're going to have 1 million teacher retirements over the next 5 years in the United States of America. Those new teachers need support. They need monies to get better at their craft, to help kids in the classroom. And we should be spending those public dollars a lot more effective than Evergreen Solar, than the $500 million blown on Solyndra, or the other startup companies. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now we will move to your closing statements. You have 2 minutes each to deal with those, and we'll go first to you, Dean, and then you'll wind up, Jamie.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank everyone for coming out to this debate. I want to thank Patch for making this a regional event with the extended coverage on the live stream. And I want to thank the voters for tuning in. This is the most important election of our lifetime. We have two different choices. We can stick with the status quo, we can stick with policies that have not worked, or we can go in a different direction. I want to hit the ground running on issues that I've worked on for many, many years. As a certified school teacher, I can deliver for the district on public education. It goes much beyond Chapter 70, which is an important issue. We have to improve professional development. We have to stop unfunded mandates. We have to improve regionalization agreements and make more decisions local. On transportation, I've talked about tonight, we have to speed up jobs. That's real economic stimulus. I've done it, I'll do it again, and I've done it with both parties. In terms of our jobs in the economy, I am not satisfied with our unemployment rate. The underemployment rate is a drastic problem. Graduates coming out of school cannot find work. If we lose that brain power, they will move to other states. In terms of health care, we've talked about the differences here tonight. I want to work on issues that will pass. I want to be in the room fighting for Metro West and Assabet Valley on issues that will pass, not stake out a position on the extreme left or the right where nothing gets done. There's too much at stake in this election. And I ask voters to go to my website, deancavaretta.com. I devoted a second website to education because I believe that's a very important issue. That website is called momsanddadsfordean.com. I'm on Twitter at DeanCav, and I'm also on Facebook. I've picked a lot of social media because in this type of election, you have to get your positions out. And I want to thank the Patch sites for their involvement. If you Google my name or this race, you will see a lot of positions I've taken on public policy issues. You'll find my record, you'll find my independence, and you'll find what I can do for this district. I encourage you to learn more about me and my campaign. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dean. And Senator?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and thank you for moderating tonight's debate as you do well at Acton Town Meeting. I want to thank the Acton Patch for hosting tonight's debate and Acton Cable TV for broadcasting it across the district. It's a great honor to represent this district, 14 communities in the Middlesex and Worcester district. It's a job I take very seriously, wake up each and every day, loving to go to the State House, really enjoying going to district events. And I think part of what I love so much about the job is that the dynamism, the innovation, the dedication of people, whether volunteering at the local level, whether elected officials, as selectmen, city councilors, school committee members, a lot of the ideas that I turn into legislation, whether talking about the Green Communities Act, whether talking about investing in transportation, whether talking about campaign finance reform, a lot of these ideas come from activists at the local level. I am someone who stays close to the ground, hosting and having as many community events as possible to get ideas from people and turn that into legislation. It's something I'm doing right now in anticipation of the next session. The areas to work on next session that I hope to work on and improve upon is the areas of education, that while we've had a good budget year in terms of increasing Chapter 70 aid, regional school transportation, special education circuit breaker, I think there's more to be done. In the areas of the innovation economy, we've made great progress and created thousands of jobs in the alternative energy sector, in the life sciences sector. I think there are new areas such as green chemistry and clean technology that we can embrace next. I am pleased to have worked on investment in infrastructure, whether water or transportation. Now we have to come up with a plan to how to properly fund it. And in the area of transparency, we made great progress this year, put in the open checkbook on the state website so anyone can see where our state taxpayer dollars are being spent. Corporate tax breaks are more transparent, but now we have to look at, are those corporate tax breaks the best investment of our state taxpayer dollars? These are the issues I want to work on, whether it's transportation, investment in infrastructure and education. It's been an honor to represent this district for the past 4 years, and I ask for your vote tonight. Thank you very much.
Jamie, thank you very much. Thank you to you two candidates. You have proven to lots of people tonight that you are knowledgeable about the issues and you're smart, and my very best to both of you as you continue to vie for this very important job. Thank you, audience. You did exactly what was asked of you. I really appreciate that. Thank you to Patch. Thank you to Acton TV. Did we accomplish our goal? Well, at least I think we made a good start on it. But it's really up to you to decide whether we did the job we started out to do. I think that ends our performance. Thank you very much, and thank you all again. Some applause, please, would be helpful.